Morning, everyone. Happy snow day. And welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the most dangerous man in the parliamentary lobby, according to his self-penned Twitter profile, the Mirror's politics correspondent, Mikey Smith. Mikey, I think you're on mute. Can you hear us?
Am I on mute?
Oh, there you go. You are there. Sorry, you were making motions with your mouth and I didn't hear you, so I didn't know that you are all right. We can hear you. Now, we're going to take you through the best stories of the day. We're going to give you something to feel good about, although also something good to feel if you fancy that. And through it all, we want you to ask us your questions. So dig into the comments, ask us whatever's burning a hole in your head, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. So what have we got today? Well, a nation's grateful homeschooling parents have awoken to find out that they can teach their children chemistry, physics, and all the skills needed for international diplomacy just by sending the kids outside for a snowball fight. And the Mirror is splashing today on the story of Amy Bestwick, who 25 years ago survived the Dunblane massacre, and having spent years dealing with the trauma associated with that, is now due to have her first child on the anniversary of the shooting. It's a great read, worth searching that out today. But note for Americans and other aliens, this is why Britain has gun laws. And it's also why no one's shut up a school ever since. Worth bearing that one in mind. But first, unbeknown to any of us, apparently the government's got a long-term COVID plan. On pages 6 and 7 of the Mirror today, it's all laid out in its glory. Unfortunately, it's probably going to be impacted by their long-term history of cock-ups, Mikey, but take us through their brilliant ideas to get us all back to normal.
So the main one that's emerged overnight is that schools are going to be open for longer in the summer term. So because they're delayed going back, they're going to add a few weeks on before breaking up at the end. It has been said that possibly further down the line they might make half term longer to make up for it and do sort of a fire break further down the line. But
so is that definite? I think, is it something that the unions are going to get cross with that, aren't they? Because it's more work for teachers who aren't going to get paid to do it. There's no one in any job in the country who'd be happy to have more work for the same pay.
I imagine the unions are going to get rather irate at this one, but it does appear that it is happening. Someone's confirmed it. Minister's confirmed it on the radio this morning. So yeah, there's that. They are obviously still working on ramping up the vaccine rollout, struggling to reach some minority communities, so they need to have a plan for which they don't appear to have yet.
Now Tony asks, do we have a lockdown end date? We've got a review for the lockdown coming up, haven't we? There's a date for that, isn't it? Sometime this month, February the 15th.
15th is when they're coming out with the roadmap out of lockdown. Now, those with long memories will remember that there was a roadmap out of lockdown sort of October last year, I believe, and it lasted about 2 weeks before it got thrown off course. I've asked Number 10 whether they feel more confident about this one, and they say they do.
So that's nice. Do they feel confident? I wonder if confidence is as infectious as a complete lack of confidence appears to be. Keep asking us your questions, everybody, especially about the government's long-term plan. Now, there's something I noticed in there that you just mentioned, Mikey, which is that on page 6, it says that South Africa are shelving their AstraZeneca doses because they found it's not as efficacious against their South African strain of the COVID virus. Now, the team behind it have said they can reprogram it very easily and they can get us new doses that do tackle the South African variant in the autumn, perhaps. But then, because, as you've said, minority groups who are most likely to catch and spread and die from this disease are not signing up for the jabs in the numbers they should do. So does this mean, and Amy, this is going to answer your question about holidays in September maybe, does it mean we're still going to have restrictions next winter because of these variants that are going around?
Well, there's certainly the possibility of that. The thing with the Oxford vaccine and the South Africa variant is that it provides limited protection against what they say is mild and moderate cases of COVID. It still gives protection for sort of the extreme cases, the sort of cases that might and you might end up in hospital. So it still works. It just doesn't work as well with mild cases. So what Oxford AstraZeneca are saying is that they're sort of revamping their vaccine a little bit, and are hoping to have a new version out which will work better against the South African variant. And what might happen is you might end up having a third jab, whereas now you have two jabs, 12 weeks apart. They are talking about maybe a booster jab if you've had the Oxford version, which would go alongside your flu jab.
Oh God.
Later in the year or towards the end of the year. And that would cover you for the South Africa variant. Now, what they're hoping, though, is that won't be as much of a problem, because they've got they've still got the South Africa variant in the UK. They've still got it sort of nailed down to where it is. So if you think way back to sort of February, March last year, they were able to track where the virus was in the country. They knew where all the cases were and that it hadn't sort of spread like wildfire into the community. That's still the case with the South Africa variant currently. They've still got a good trace on it, and that's why they're doing surge testing in the postcodes where it has come. So they're hoping they can get it contained in those postcodes, so it will just go away. And
yeah, because people never leave their postcodes, Mike. There's a big barbed wire fence around postcodes, so that's us restricted from wandering into the next street, isn't it? Now, as Nick says, what pray? Oh, I love a pray. What pray is a long-term COVID plan? How can any government have a long-term plan in an evolving situation? It's a bizarre idea. And he's got a point, hasn't he, Mike? Because as we've just been talking about, with the South African variant, with the Kent variant, with the Brazil variant, there's a whole world out there, and most of it's not vaccinated. This disease is circulating happily and mutating every time it does so, eventually mutating to a point where a vaccine can't catch it, perhaps, or one of our existing vaccines. And that will then be imported in the same way they always have been. Not least because the long-term COVID plan, as Nick was talking about last year, was to not bother closing the borders. And they still haven't closed them properly. So if the virus is mutating and evolving, we need to evolve with it as well, don't we?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. But I think there's a certain argument that you do as much as you can to sort of prevent the worst case scenario. I'm going to do something which is very odd for a Monday morning paper review, which is to bring up a story I wrote on Friday.
Ooh,
sorry. But there's a story I wrote on Friday because they dropped they released the Sage scientific papers every Friday afternoon, which is very helpful to them because no one reads the news on a Friday afternoon. But there was one that caught my eye because normally they publish these after a month or so after they're not currently in sort of active consideration. And there was a bunch of papers they dropped on Friday that were 6 months old, that date back to July. And these were outlining the new worst case scenario, which turns out to be exactly what has happened. It predicted the last 6 months almost to the day. And the important bit, and you can go back and read this story, it's on the Mirror's website. The important bit was that the scientists were saying in big bold letters, this is not unavoidable. If you follow our advice, then it doesn't have to be like this. The worst case scenario doesn't have to come to pass. And they suggested things like the one they put in black and white was, don't encourage people to go back to work in workplaces, in offices. And this was in July. And in August, they went on a big, the government went on a big push to get people to go back into workplaces.
And in July as well, they said, I think there was previous reports that Sage was saying, if you don't get on top of this virus during the summer months, there's going to be a mutation by winter, and then we're going to have a massive spike.
In the same paper, they also warned that relaxing restrictions over Christmas would cause explosive outbreaks across the country. I
wonder why they left it 6 months to publish those papers, Mike.
I'm told.
What's the reason?
In fairness, I'm told by the Government Office for Science that they only publish them once they're no longer under policy consideration. So,
in other words,
so that's why. they say.
Well, right, okay, yes, because they've had to inform policy up to now because they were correct and we weren't following the science. Now, Kelly says, do you see an end to these lockdowns? How much longer is this going to be going on? How long's a piece of string, Kelly? How long can we keep Boris Johnson as Prime Minister? I think is the answer to that question. And he seems bizarrely popular still, doesn't he, Mikey?
He does. I heard Rachel Reeves, a Labour politician, on the radio this morning saying that the two parties were neck and neck. They're not quite neck and neck. The Tories are still ahead by 3 or 4 points in most of the polls. I don't understand it. But Boris Johnson is a tough one
the Prime Minister has to kill with his stupidity and his late decisions before people who he is killing notice it and decide they'd rather have something else. Yeah. Amy asks, keep asking us your questions, by the way, everybody. Get into the comments and ask us whatever's on your mind. What happens with the people who won't have the job? Are they going to spread it? Yes. And they're going to catch it and they're going to die from it as well. And they're going to be ill and they're going to get long COVID if you don't have the jab. The other issue you've got, Amy, is the people who can't have the jab. I know people who are undergoing chemotherapy at the moment for cancer. They can't have the jab because they've got a weakened immune system, and they need to be protected by all the people around them getting the jab, because that is what true herd immunity is. And that's not happening. Now, Mikey, what is the government going to do, particularly ethnic minorities? They seem to have a lower take-up of the vaccine. Why is that the case? Is there Russian disinformation or something being spread to them? And what can the government do about it?
I'm not sure it's Russian disinformation in this case. The scientists have said that from their sort of analysis, the whole sort of internet anti-vax movement is actually having a fairly mild effect on take-up of the vaccine. From what I understand, the issues are cultural. Some of them are religious reasons, and it's really, I think what it is that there are certain parts of the country that government messaging just isn't reaching. So what the government's trying to do is to find sort of community champions, people within certain cultural groups who will be sort of ambassadors for having the vaccine. But you see reports from nurses and hospital workers of people coming into hospitals and saying they're not having the jab because their pastor has told them not to, or the leader of their sort of community group has told them not to, because in some cases they believe it's against their religion. They believe that God will stop them getting the vaccine, stop them getting the virus. I've heard these stories through friends and sources. The government doesn't appear to have a working plan. They say they have a plan, but I don't know if it's working. The figures show that it's apparently not currently.
Yeah, so it's obviously not working. So, I mean, there aren't really any proper reasons to suspect, like the vaccine's not halal or kosher. That's not really an issue. No. Some people have got an issue, I think, with stem cells being used in some of the research, which is true. Yeah. But, as you've said, the principal reason is that these communities don't trust a fat, white Bullingdon boy to have their interests at heart and don't listen to their messages or instructions. They just don't really feel that it's got anything to do with them. Now, Pete asks, will we have to wear masks for years to come? Pete, I don't know about you. I mean, no one really enjoys wearing a mask, but I was saying to my parents only yesterday, in the years to come, I'm keeping my cloth masks that I've got, and I am going to be wearing them every winter for the rest of my days when I go on the London Tube or things like that, because whether it's cold or flu or norovirus or something else, I am more aware of virology now than I ever was before. I'm never going to touch an underground handrail on a tube escalator ever again as long as I live. Number of times you say and then put your hand on the handrail. No, I'm never touching it, and I'll be doing that when I'm 90. So some people will be happy to keep taking precautions forever to protect themselves generally, and then it may well be if coronavirus doesn't get tackled, we're going to have to anyway, Pete, I'm afraid. And Claire asks, there's 21,000 people flying into the UK from other countries every day. Why? Beats me. I'm not sure why you all still live here, actually, Claire, because it's a dreadful place at the moment. It doesn't matter if everybody is vaccinated when people can come in and bring other variants in. She's right, isn't she, Mikey? Why haven't they closed the borders?
I have absolutely no idea. They say the reason they haven't brought in hotel quarantines, and there's been a lot of talk about hotel quarantines the last week or so, but let's not forget that hotel quarantines are only for British people coming from 30 odd countries, like returning home. Then
You're kidding.
no,
British people.
Yeah, because the borders are closed from those countries anyway, apart from British people returning home. So the hotel quarantine, that it's going to take them 10 days, or about 8 days now, I guess, to still sort out the logistics of, it only applies to people coming from 30 countries where they've got this, got various variants running wild, and it only applies to British people. Everyone else, either if you're coming from those countries, you can't come at all. In fairness, the border is closed to those countries. But everyone else from every other country can come in, get on public transport, go somewhere, and they have to self-isolate at home for 10 days. So this whole thing that is taking them so long to put in place, that Australia and New Zealand put in place in less than 24 hours back in April, this only applies to a tiny number of people.
What's the point of this government? They got elected literally on the basis of controlling borders. They literally, that is their big sell. That's the thing which would unite the country, where Remainers, people who vote to Remain like me, are now happy to close the borders and control them, and they're still not doing it. Now, Wayne says, should there be a bill passed in Parliament to bring into law to make the vaccine compulsory? Short answer is no, Wayne. Mikey, can you explain why?
Because we as a nation do things like this by consent. The government should be the government's job to convince people to do it, and it shouldn't be that hard. You would think, but that would making it mandatory, making it a legal requirement would cause sort of a two-level society where people who are objectors to the vaccine don't have access to government services. You wouldn't be able to go to hospital because they'd make you have,
Yeah, and all the doctors and scientists, Wayne, say, please don't make it mandatory because it is going to have worse effects. Think of any law at all, anywhere in the country. Is there someone breaking it? Are they prepared to break it because they've been told it's a rule and they can't do it? Well, then that's why you don't bother making vaccines mandatory, because people will just break it for the hell of it. As Steve asks, good morning, Steve, it's a waste of time asking all these questions to them, as not one of them can give us a straight answer. I'm a self-employed second-hand shop. I presume a shop owner, but if you're a shop and you're typing, brilliant news. I'm self-employed too, so welcome, Steve. I feel your pain. That could cause me to close the shop up if things don't ease, so I can reopen and sell my furniture to the general public. It's a disgrace. You've got lots of people who are suffering in lockdown, suffering because because of coronavirus is carrying on the way it is, and they want lockdown to ease. We all do. I had a sudden attack of the glooms this weekend for no earthly reason at all, except just more of this. How can we? There doesn't seem to be a way. This is what the government needs in terms of its long-term COVID plan, is a way to make everybody happy, where Steve can open his shop, people can get shopping, everyone's mental health can improve, and coronavirus can actually be tackled, and we can have the impression we have a competent government who knows what they're doing. That's the plan they need.
Absolutely, completely agree. There was a report I read over the weekend that essentially said people's patience. It's like the adrenaline has run out. This has been going on so long that people are really getting to the end of their tether with this, especially in the sort of the third lockdown it is now. But the government's putting all of its hopes into the vaccine, and that if they
Vaccine's
get
not
enough
gonna
people
work
vaccinated,
if they leave the borders open. Boris, if you're listening,
he's not.
no, it's not. But Pratt should be listening and close the goddamn borders. Now, apparently, we have in the comments we have a vaccine fact check. All right, so if you've got any questions about the vaccines, if there's something you've heard about it or you're not sure if it's right or wrong for you, have a look in the comments. There is a link to the Mirror's vaccine fact check service, and you can get your questions answered, and it will hopefully answer some of your concerns. Now, keep asking us your questions. We want to know what you think about all this. And Steve apparently has got a bed for sale. That's also in the comments. So, let him know if you fancy a nice bed. And well done, Steve, for making the most of your opportunities. That's self-employment for you. Yay. Constantly, never asleep. Now, I want to get on to another story. King of the North, Andy Burnham. He who took on Boris Johnson and lost, last time I noticed, says he still harbours ambitions to be Labour leader. Now, Sir Keir Starmer's done well. He's narrowed the gap with the Tories since taking over, but he's not really punching through. And the Labour lefties don't like him at all. So, Mikey, has Burnham got a chance? And is this a plan? Is this part of some scheme?
There's two parts to that. One, does he have a chance? You've really got to look back at his past record. He stood in contest to be Labour leader twice. The first time he came fourth, and Ed Miliband won. The second time was in 2015, and he came second to Jeremy Corbyn. Now, I mean, you could say that shows improvement, but it's not often that someone stands to be leader, aside from maybe Jeremy Corbyn. I'm not sure if he did before, but it's not often that you see someone stand for leader twice and then win on the third occasion. That said, if there had been a leadership contest in, say, late November, when Andy was all over the news and becoming an unlikely sex symbol for standing up to Boris Johnson on behalf of his city, then Tina Brown says in the comments, Burnham is hot and sexy. I don't see it.
Keep taking the pills, Tina.
But each their own. Each their own. But yeah, he got this reputation for being king in the north a little bit in November after that fantastic press conference where he got all angry about Manchester not getting any money to deal with being in lockdown. And in fairness, he did well. It may not have worked, but he landed some hits, which you don't often see.
He didn't get the 25 million he was asking for, and then the government rolled it out to London a couple of weeks later. Keep going, Tina. He has got lovely eyelashes, I'll give you that.
He has got lovely eyelashes.
Lovely eyelashes.
He insists he doesn't wear mascara. No, he doesn't wear mascara. But he does have lovely eyelashes.
Well, he also says in this, and what I noticed, Mikey, is that in this quote that he's got in this article, he says, I'm not sitting here plotting a way to do so, but if it happens to be that I was leader at some point in the future, then, maybe. Now, the thing when you're a journalist, you always look for the stuff they didn't need to tell you. And if he said, I'd be lying if I don't have aspirations to lead the party maybe one day, that's an answer to the question. But saying I'm not sitting here plotting is extra. He didn't need to say. So does that mean he is actually plotting?
I mean, I think it's at the very least at the back of his mind. One thing that was interesting was when this quote appeared, he said this in a sort of a Q&A session with a charity in Manchester. And there was one journalist in the audience who wasn't me. And when it was sort of reported back to me that he'd said it, it went out on Twitter. And within about 10 minutes, he'd replied to it saying, oh, this was taken slightly out of context, but I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it. So, he's trying to sort of play it down, but it's clearly, if we're talking about long-term plans, I think possibly this is part of his long-term plan.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Adam points out there, Manchester's been in some very strict COVID restrictions for pretty much since the start of all this. And having you know, a leader who is a politician representing you, who's good at agitating, doesn't necessarily mean be any good at running anything.
It doesn't. But
Andy Burnham's been, well, you know, he's been in government, he's been a minister. But the thing that we haven't had with this government, with Boris Johnson, is people with a load of experience who know exactly how to operate the levers of power. And that's partly why things have gone a bit haywire. Does Andy Burnham have the experience to do better than?
I mean, Andy Burnham certainly has experience. He's run the Home Office. He's not the Home Office. He's run the health. He's run health. He was culture secretary before that. He has been in several shadow jobs since then. He's got ministerial experience. He knows how the levers work, but at the same time, he hasn't been entirely successful. You know, he's lost twice and didn't get what Manchester needs. So I think you need the combination. You need someone, you know, for the sake of argument, like Keir Starmer, who is perhaps not as exciting as he could be, but who is, you know, the country needs a lawyer. I think could possibly be Labour's next campaign slogan. But you also need well, this is the thing. You also need someone who's a bit of a rabble rouser, and Andy Burnham apparently is. I never had him down as a rabble rouser until November, but apparently he is. You know, he's popular in that sort of in that way that he. I think there was a lot of frustration, and he became an outlet for that frustration.
And we're a rabble ready to be roused now. We're increasingly angry about this, and what the country needs is an opposition that isn't Marcus Rashford, or if so, Marcus Rashford for PM. I don't care if it is Marcus Rashford, just anybody rather than this lot. It looks like
I find it fascinating. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Marcus Rashford. He's done a fantastic job, but I find it fascinating that Boris Johnson will listen to a well-meaning footballer, but any criticism from the elected opposition is out of the question. As an attack on hardworking people, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. We need an opposition. We need it last year, even. Right. Now, let's get on to some good news, right? Because there are good things happening in the world, and there's a brilliant story we want to tell you about. I love that idea. Now, this is a story about Frank Rothwell. He is on his way to raising £1 million for dementia research by becoming the oldest person to row across the Atlantic at a time when everyone over 65 is being made to feel like they're expendable, like they don't matter, like they're hovering on the brink of extinction and filled with underlying health conditions, which means they're causing problems for everybody else. Maybe that they're even causing lockdown. Frank, who is 70, has rowed 3,000 miles, even as his own brothers died of Alzheimer's. Now, Mikey, this just shows, doesn't it? You're never too old to just pack it in. And there isn't any such thing as someone who is expendable.
I mean, there's hope for all of us. I don't know about you, but it took him 6 weeks to get across the Atlantic on his solo boat. The last time the gyms were open, I tried to do 10 minutes on the rowing machine and I got bored. So I think
he was getting emails there at the same time, and he had a pod of like 300 dolphins around him at one point, and he had 17-foot waves to deal with. I mean, that alleviates the boredom a bit.
Yeah, I imagine he had stuff to do. But yeah, no. If I was wearing a hat, I would be taking it off to this guy. Good for Frank.
Yeah. Now, if you want to donate to Frank's Just Giving page, he's on 720,000 at the moment. He needs a bit more. It's justgiving.com/fundraising/Frank Rothwell. ROTHWELL. So go and bung him a fiver because he damn well deserves it. Now, Nadine asks, what's happening with the clinically extremely vulnerable children? No plans for them as they cannot even have the vaccine. No, Nadine, because the vaccine's not been trialled in children, so it's not known as to be safe to be given to children, which means that anyone who's extremely vulnerable is, as everybody else, whether you're an adult or a child, you're reliant upon the people around you having the vaccine, aren't you, Mikey?
Yeah, that's the head and tail of it. Children will be vulnerable children will be reliant on enough people getting the vaccine to get herd immunity, so they are less at risk.
Exactly, and it's the same problem that in some minorities you may be more likely to have some vulnerabilities, either in adults or in children, and they're less likely to take up the vaccine, which is why we might face some of these restrictions again next year. Now, Adam says, people have had COVID and survived. Do they need the vaccine? I saw some stuff on the BBC by their excellent health reporter, Fergus Walsh, who says that you may only need one vaccine, one dose, but they do recommend that you get the vaccine even if you've had the bug, don't they, Mikey? Do you know about this? Or am I the only one who's...
I have read a little about this, not very much, but my understanding is there have been documented cases where people have got it twice. So
yeah, especially there's these new variations going around.
Exactly.
And Diane says, are we going back into tears if we've dried them yet? We are, aren't we, Mikey?
That's what we're expecting. We'll find out more on the 15th when the roadmap is set out.
Right. Okay. So,
but that's what we're expecting.
From what they've said already, it does sound a bit like some kind of tears. Although Boris is very keen on a national approach rather than a regional one. Whether he gets away with that, who knows? Yeah,
I think that's going to be to an extent with. I think he might be talking about schools with the national approach. Right. But it's not entirely clear yet. I think we'll have to wait for another week or so until the roadmap is out there.
Yeah. Now, Rebecca says vaccines won't be mandatory for now. They're not going to be mandatory forever, I don't think, Rebecca, but they'll find a way to make it happen. I know people who have had serious side effects from this vaccine. Where's that on the news? Well, you need to tell a journalist about it, Rebecca, as you just have. You just told 2 journalists. And then you need the people who've had these serious side effects to waive their patient anonymity and tell other people what it is that's happened to them. If they don't do that, they might not have had as serious a side effect as you think. Now, there is such a thing as people who can fall ill as a result of vaccines. It's a very, very tiny minority out of the total of about 12 million who've had it already. And if there are long-term effects, there is a compensation fund set up by the government for all vaccines for that, because you are fiddling around with your immune system. But generally speaking, you're going to be all right with the vaccine. And generally speaking, you should be taking it, unless your doctor advises you against. Now, Alan says, do you honestly believe any other government will make a difference to what's happening to this country? That's a $100 million question, isn't it, Mikey? Because not thinking about whether Jeremy Corbyn would do better, but if we had another government today, right now, this moment, of any party, of anyone leading it, the mess they've got to deal with is so great. What could Mr. Competent, if he was, or Mrs. Competent, if they were elected today, how could they fix what Boris Johnson has done up to now?
Well, I mean, it is very difficult to say because we are nearly a year into this, and there's so many sort of branches gone off the decision tree by this stage. But if you look back to how other countries dealt with this in the very beginning and what situation they're in now, the one I keep coming back to is Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand is almost entirely COVID free because they have proper restrictions at their border, and they did proper lockdowns, and there were hefty lockdowns for a relatively short period of time, and now they are COVID free. There was a fantastic picture in one of the papers a few weeks ago of a music festival, like a full-on huge, like Glastonbury style music festival where everyone was jumping around and dancing. And this was in New Zealand, and it happened a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And that's because they've taken these steps that our government chose not to take. You know, it's not like there's a huge difference geographically between ourselves and New Zealand. There's differences in size, but we're islands.
And when people point out that if you're older and fatter, we were an older and fatter nation, and therefore you're more likely to suffer from it. Japan is the oldest country in the world, oldest population, 5,000 deaths and closed their borders because they're an island. The Cook Islands are the fattest nation on earth with the most diabetes. No deaths, 0 deaths because they closed their borders because they're island. And I'm very quickly going to have to go outside and make snow angels, it would appear, out. But Tina says, hi, Tina, back again. I think when lockdown's over, everyone should do a street party. Yes, and possibly street snow angels as well, I should think. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for joining us, Mikey. I'll see you at the street party. Have fun, everybody. Go and enjoy your snow day. Bye.
Bye.